this video, I want to explore ego and look at it from a couple of different dimensions. In metaphysical and spiritual communities and doctrines throughout much of history, the ego has been identified as the enemy, as the problem, as the illusion, as the source of human suffering. Egoic greed, egoic jealousy, egoic hatred, egoic revenge, possessiveness, whatever it is, it's focused on the ego. And I'd like to provide an alternate perspective that to me makes a lot more sense. Now, in evolutionary terms, we have a series of brain structure developments, starting with our reptilian brain and our traumatic biological circuit, which is centered around fight, flight, and freeze for the purpose of physical survival in response to immediate, often very graphic threats. We have evolved as social mammals. All of the monkey, ape, gorilla subsets of mammals are social creatures. The survival of the one is predicated historically on the survival of the group. This is our nature, to protect the group and to belong to the group. This is a biological heritage, and because of this, social isolation has been added to a potential traumatic mechanism, meaning that it's no longer going to that fight, flight, freeze response in the biology. It's no longer just a physical threat, that a great deal of our deepest trauma is associated with social shame and isolation. So we have this brain that is geared to keep the body alive in environments of social shame and isolation, of physical threat or perceived threat. Now, most of the threats that many of us face, particularly those in Western countries, are of a social nature. That the threat of shame and humiliation, the threat of being branded a loser, is actually a bigger threat for many than physical survival, because we don't need 3-story homes. We don't need apartments with granite countertops. We have, as a species, survived. We didn't even have bridges to sleep under, 50,000 years ago. So we're not in a situation where most of the threat is physical. It's social. It is rape and the shame and trauma and humiliation and confusion of rape in a culture that denies feelings. that is an issue. And so if we look at all of this in connection with the ego, what I'm getting at is that the brains have a foundation that rests on the trauma center of the brain, the reptilian, the oldest brain that's designed to keep us alive. Now, we also have, right and left hemisphere, more modern brains, and we have the pineal gland, which seems to be the organ of facilitating a conscious transcendent experience. What I mean by that is, there is infinite amounts of transcendent experience that we are not conscious of. There's no we there to be conscious of it. So we need in this construct of human consciousness, we need there to be a part that says, this is me, watching, participating, being a part of this transcendent experience. If there's no me, it just is. There's not any sense of that's me. And so within this human experience that ranges from the most reptilian, strategic, fear-based, trauma reacted, the chemicals and programs of fight, flight, freeze, etc., as well as mating and stuff, these are survival programs, as is the program to belong, the program to be a part of the pack, to help the pack survive and to be blessed by the pack, to be blessed by, and belong to the tribe, which is why in some Aboriginal cultures, the method of punishment and execution is to deny the belonging, the reality, and the existence of the person who has transgressed the cultural boundary, who has gone beyond the pale. The pale, which was an Irish wall that separated the civilized, the Western converts with the wild Gaelic. So that wall was a pale, and going beyond the pale, there's a sense you don't know quite what's out there. And society, civilized society, has always protected itself as well as created a barrier to maintain its ignorance of what it is ignorant about. Well, that's what walls do. They create a barrier. They keep us in. They keep others out. They keep us from going out. And they keep us from seeing beyond the wall. That's its purpose. And so for the part of us that is looking for consistency, for stability, which the best way to do that is to become self-referencing, because there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of complexity. The universe, as Terence McKenna would say, is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine. And so if we want something a little bit neat and tidy, we're going to need to erect a wall. But we can't just have people going out of the wall and coming back again, with all kinds of new ideas and new crazy, clothing and stuff. Like, where do you get that? And it's like, well, there's this whole chaotic world out there that has nothing to do with mainstream, with Main Street, with this little boxed-in culture. It has nothing to do with any of that. How are we going to keep people in that kind of situation? Well, we've got to stop people from going out to begin with, and if they do go out, we've got to create all kinds of epithets to describe them, such that anything they have to say has no value whatsoever. We've got to keep them on the outside with so many judgments and labels that by the time they come back, nothing they say has any basis or value whatsoever. And so this is a way that, in a variety of different things, some families do it when they're, if their children stops to be part of the religion, they won't speak to them, that they will not acknowledge their existence, that they will disinherit. And what a culture and what a person and what a family is doing is it's basically saying that we've created a self-referencing ecology that is stable. This stability is helping us relax and leave the trauma center in the brain and tell us that we are safe. Therefore, we are not paralyzed and can get on with life. And you miserable fuck of an individual, have gone and ruined the spell. You've ruined it. You've ruined it by going beyond the pale, going beyond the wall. And now you're telling us there's a different world out there, there's other languages out there. You're telling us that we're not the center of the universe. You're telling us that we may be the backwards people as opposed to all those heathens that we've walled ourselves off from, that we might be the backward people. You're telling us that they're succeeding over there in Russia or over there in Cuba or over there in psychedelic land or over there in atheism or over there in some new channeled or new age. You're telling us that they're doing something better than we are, because it's always the case. There's never been a variant of human culture in the history of culture that didn't do something different than the other cultures. That's what makes it a variant. And every single difference has an innate positive and negative expression. There is a positive aspect relative to any value. And here's where we get into the value hierarchy and structure, because it's like, well, what are you referencing? Are you referencing Grecian aesthetics? Are you referencing potency of presence? Are you referencing diversity? Are you referencing beauty? Are you referencing vitality? So, and I want you to get what, like, these are the unspoken laws, the unspoken programs within a culture. That an American Indian who is referencing vitality and beauty, the beauty of a song. If you watch that, little echo of that Dancing with Wolves, that beauty, that vitality. How many British or American or French, how many people in the West have the kind of vitality that you get a small glimpse of in Dancing with Wolves? How many have that vitality? See, but we are not a culture founded on vitality. So we say they are heathens on the basis not that we are more vital than they are, because that's not what we value. We say that they're heathens based on our own self-referencing value, which is that we are more rational. We can't really say in those times that we were less violent. I mean, there's all kinds of hypocrisies within a culture. There's a kernel of truth. Every culture is different. Every culture is different. And yet, we also often lie. If we read all the historical books that have ever been written and just count the drift between reality and the framing, it's similar to what you find when you do the studies to who's above average in driving, or who has above average looks, or who is above average intelligent. And in the wonderful tradition of Garrison Keillor and Lake Wobegon, we are all, according to us, above average when we do the tests. And we have to recognize this trait of self-aggrandizement and recognize this tendency within every culture, within any time period, within any family, within every group. Occasionally it'll go reverse, where we're special because we're evil and more terrible and something different. But that there is a need to be different, to differentiate ourselves, to find who we are. That's part of this ever fine-tuning, zooming in, zooming in, zooming in, zooming in. It's like, where's the end of, that zoom process? And it never ends. And of course, our mind is the most nuanced and valuable tool, because, once a spiritual, sacred, transcendent experience becomes reduced into language, number one, two, reduced into dogma, and finally reduced into tradition, now you can have, literally 1,000 sects of Christianity that are all, just in that one narrow sect amongst the more than 10,000 cultures that have existed on this planet alone. We now have, no. We believe that it's best to do it like this. We believe in the old way. We believe in change. We believe this. We're more focused on the Old Testament. We're more focused on this. We don't have sex before marriage. We believe if you do. And so it's all about differentiating. Here's who I am. Here's who I, this church, this building, this community, this family is. And, of course, the great terror is to go back into the psychic soup, to have the boundaries dissolve and realize that maybe we're not so different from the planet. Maybe we're a part of this planetary ecology. That maybe we're not so different from that other family. Maybe we both worship materialism efficiency, money, and appearance in slightly different ways. Maybe we're not so different from that other culture. We both want to belong. We both want to feel safe. And your culture says that when you defer to the family and the elders and take care of the old and follow tradition, that you are safe and you will belong and you are blessed. And this culture, I'm in Thailand at present, and there are some extreme tensions between where Thailand falls on a number of cultural continuums and where the United States falls on those same cultural continuums. It's like whether it's a continuum between valuing tradition and valuing newness. It's all the same continuum, but every culture picks its point. And the United States will say new and improved because we all know that if it's new, it's got to be better than what was there before. But of course, if you're Thai, you all know that if it's worked for thousands of years, it's a good system. It's not one of these idiotic new ideas that doesn't work, that creates disruption, that dishonors the elders. We all know that. And so what comes out of every culture, where it's placed on a given cultural continuum, from valuing tradition to valuing new. And then you find the absurdities are, of course, always on the extreme, because an American will tear out a perfectly beautiful landscape and gut a home, because we all know that doing something new means progress. We all know it. And so the fact that it's only 30% nicer than what was there, that it took a whole year of their life during which they ate out of the attic or had to stay in a hotel, during which their spouse and them spatted, endlessly because the delay and the dust and this. We all know that, of course, that's progress. Whereas a Thai person might look at what was there, might reflect on why it was there, and might enjoy the memories and the associations and the traditions around what is there, and enjoy that whole year and not spend a dime, and not use all those resources, and not stress their marriage, and not disrupt their childhood social experience, and be proud to live in a home of their grandfather, etc., etc. And so you have, and of course there's no objective benefit. I mean, you when you look at terms of resources, of course, every time you change something, you spend more energy. And so traditional Thai culture, thousands of years old, not just a couple hundred years old, traditional Thai culture consumes maybe 1,000th of the energy per capita of a traditional per capita expenditure of energy in American culture, in modern American culture. And whether it's 1,000 or 500 times or 380 times, you get the drift that it's relative. It's relative to something. So if new is good, then anything that's new is making progress. If old is sacred, anything that's old is better. And yet, both of these values tend to lose sight of a third value of well-being, So the real question of an intelligent culture, whether it honors the old or the new, is, does the cost in time, money, energy, natural resources, emotional vulnerability, does the cost of a change lead to a net profit in well-being or a net loss in well-being? So going back to that American who just knows that remodeling their multi-million-dollar house into another multi-million-dollar house is, there's just no other way to think of it. This is progress. We just got to suffer through this. We don't want to get behind the times. We don't want to get behind the times. See, that's a statement of a culture that honors newness. But it doesn't necessarily honor well-being. Because if we look at that culture and say, well, is there more happiness in this family because we bowed to the God of newness? Or is there more happiness in this family because we bowed to the God of tradition? That's the question. And it must be measured before you can begin to see. And this, of course, is just this is just what's coming to me, what makes sense to me. The God of well-being, the goddess of well-being, must be at the pinnacle for a culture to be intelligent. That it is not intelligent in my eyes, to expend large amounts of time, energy, and natural resources to create suffering, which is what we've done, for example, in the war on drugs. It's created enormous suffering relative to many other things that could be done. And this comes back to that question of how does each culture deal with the individual that goes outside the wall, beyond the pale? Does it punish them? Does it punish them legally, financially, socially, with shame? What's the punishment? How does each culture keep its self-referencing protocol active when it will dissolve as soon as you go outside the wall? This is why travel is so beautiful. When I went to England and I was 10 years old, I saw these giant locks on the door. I couldn't understand it. You go down the hardware store, you wanted a new door handle lock. It's like literally 3 times the steel. And it just hit me. That's just how they do things here. There's no rationale. And now we're starting to see the dual flush toilets in the United States. But when I was growing up in England and visited different parts of Europe, they have been around for decades. See, it doesn't take any more steel. It doesn't take any more porcelain to do a dual flush. It takes a little bit of thought, and it takes having European values. They make perfect sense within European values, a little bit different than American values. And so you have this wonderful opportunity to see that whatever the wall is made of, and it's always made of those people that don't do this and that do this, are always, less educated, degenerates, And you don't want to be one of those people. So stay in here where it's comfortable. We'll just all agree that this is the time for lunch, this is what should be eaten, this is the time to go to bed, this is the books to read, this is the thing to this. And let's just agree not to question that in any way. Could we please do that? Because it's peaceful. It's peaceful. The rhythm of life, the rhythm of cultural life. But that peace does, of course, come at a cost. And the cost is that there is always a percentage, and this is where it comes back to the ego, there is always a percentage of the self that is betrayed by every single culture throughout history. There is a part of the self that is betrayed. It is not honored. It is not recognized. It is not catered to. It is not tolerated. It is abused. And in that terrain of our psyche, we experience loneliness, shame, trauma, sadness, terror. We experience the uninvited guest, to use Rumi's line in The Guest House, the uninvited guest. We experience that part in ourself that is both evoked by the environment and denied in the environment. We experience that part of us which is outside the cultural wall. And the bargain, the Faustian bargain of every culture, is always the same. Leave that part of yourself outside the wall. Send it out beyond the pale. Do not bring it to our table. And we will bless you with superiority, with money, with comfort, with a place at the table. We will bless you with a place at the table. But the condition in every institution, in every country, in every culture throughout time, is you must leave this part of yourself outside the wall. Now, of course, this can't be done. We can dissociate, which we do when we're traumatized, when that part is attacked viciously and violently, whether it's sensitivity in men or emotionality in women or the innocence of trusting in young people that's whacked out because it has no place in a Western world where selfishness is actually considered to be positive, where shrewdness and selfishness is considered to be positive. So if you are not being selfish enough, if you're trusting someone just because they said this, we've got to teach you a lesson. We've got to whack this part down in you. You idiot, how could you have believed that? We're not going to whack down the sadistic sociopath who lied to you, raped you, cheated you, stole from you, betrayed you. We're not going to say too much about them, and it's usually a him, but we're not going to say too much about them. But you fool, how could you have believed that? We're going to attack the innocence. And in some situations, we're even going to honor the betrayal. Well, he's got a smooth game going on over there. You ever heard a woman in the West talk about a guy that has tricked her into going to bed with him? He's got a smooth game, there's a certain admiration in the sociopath that wins. Because in our culture, it's not about honor. On some level, we have a very complex code, but it's not about honor on some level. It's about winning. In many of our dealings with our native tribesmen, our own values of law, they didn't have boundaries around land and all that. We said the law is better. We're bringing law to America. And we said that writing is better than words, so we're going to write this stuff down. And we said, ownership is better than sharing and moving around. We said all these things. These are our values. And we said if you break the law, you deserve to be shot and hanged and all this stuff. And then we broke the law. We dishonored the treaties because we could. And aren't we proud of it? We're proud to be Americans. We're proud because we won, because we're the greatest, because we were shrewd. And even if we're not proud, usually in the back room, it's like, well, at least we won. We won't say anything about this thing, because that's, it's not something to be, it's a complex thing that we have with this winning sociopathic energy. We admire the business person that gets the sale, even when they transgress certain social protocols, etc. And so, as long as it's successful. So the success, and I've heard this in biographies over and over again in American business people, is they talk about how they got stuff off the ground. And in many cases, there was a little bit of, quote, hanky-panky, which is what we say to the nice way of breaking the rules, as long as it all ends well. Well, how I started my clothing business, this is one recently, is, I turned out these, I bought these $4 pants, I turned them inside out and I cut them like this, and then I ran into this person, and you can see how you respond to this. I ran into this person and he said, where do you get those cool pants? And I thought quickly. We're talking about the shrewd sociopath here. I thought quickly. And I said, well, I buy them for $20 over in England. They're the rage over there. He says, I want them. Any you can get to me, I'll buy them for $20. It's like, well, I've got shipping and all that, so $25. And see, everyone's exuding praise at this point to this entrepreneur who has just lied for their own personal gain. Well, we don't really like looking at that part of business, but it all ended well. Indeed. He went back and forth, buying $4 clothes, turning them inside out, making a few scissor stripes, selling them for $25. Then that spawned a desire to go into clothing design and this and that and the other, and then is going into this and that and the other, and now he's a hip clothing brand. Is this wonderful? So this whole thing wouldn't have begun if he hadn't been shrewd, if he just told the truth. If he just said, I paid $4 for these over at here, I turn them inside out, I snip like this. You could go over there and buy them for $4. And there's not and I'm not talking about the nitty-gritty here as much as I'm talking about the fact that for this self, this whole self, that is never fully invited to the cultural table. Because just like if that man had honored, let's say, a value of truth or a value of generosity and kindness in that moment, what are his good old boy Western business people going to be telling him? You fool! You fool! You could have made a fortune. All you had to do was keep that secret, say this, go over there, buy all that cheap stuff, sell it all here for top dollar. That's how we all get rich. You fool! And in our culture, he's a fool if he's sincere, generous, and honest in that situation. Maybe a noble fool. Depends. We play these games. As long as you're rich, as long as you're famous and all that, then we'll do like the Abe Lincoln thing, where it's like he walked all the way back for a penny. That's how wonderful he is. But he has to be Abe Lincoln. We don't just say it to the passers-by. We don't say to some beggar who sleeps under a bridge, they walked all the way back a mile. Nobody's talking about them. The reason they're talking about Abe is because he got to be president. And so then, it's the power. You have to fall within the cultural screen to get projected onto and to be visible. And then we do all kinds of weird things with the back-end stories. But what do you do with that part of who you are that is not welcome, that is not safe, that is shamed, that is denied, that is suppressed, but in many ways evoked? Because there's this paradoxical dance, like I've been noticing it in America as a young man. Because on the one hand, I'm not supposed to cry at the barbaric cruelty and unkindness of the way the feminine self is treated within the country, men and women, by men and women, of all ages. I'm not supposed to cry about that. If I do, I should at least have the decency to do it in private. So we have this sense of what private is for is the unveiling and personal honoring of the dishonored and disowned cultural shadow. You do it in private. You don't let anyone see you. You're ashamed. Meaning you are shamed. Meaning the part of you that, as an American man, has tender and sensitive feelings is shamed. Which means that as you enter into that domain within your own psyche, within that ever-turning wheel in which we explore the full spectrum of our potential, our possibility, who we are, as we enter into that wheel, in order for life to turn, will eventually take us to that point of profound, vulnerable sensitivity. And it's not welcome. It is shameful. within a culture that shames it. It becomes shameful. Shame is just a cultural thing that says basically if you do this, you're outside the cultural box. Now, this gets into the area of absurdity and barbarity, because on the one hand you have this box that is created so that we can all go to sleep in a self-referencing reality where stuff gets recycled and recycled and recycled, and there's nothing new, so there's nothing to be upset about. You just keep reading the old classics, saying the old things, eating the old food. Like, what's to be upset about? And it's always pain. Pain within the box. There is always pain inside the box, number one. The pain is always caused by the box, number two. And the answer to the pain is always outside the box, number three. And the resistance to taking down those walls is a life or death fight to the death for many. The fear of the unknown, the fear of going out into a broader reality where the truth becomes a truth that is only true in certain moments in time, from certain perspectives, relative to certain values. Is so upsetting to the narrow mind that people will die for their dogmas. They will not die for their soul, for humanity, but they will die for their dogmas, because their dogmas protect them from that unknown chaos beyond the pale. So, how does this all have to do with egos? Well, within a great deal of the spiritual, hypocritical, all these different things, first of all, there's boxes. This is spiritual, this isn't spiritual. And then there's these boxes, this is selfish, and this is not selfish. And they're just boxes. And they don't make any sense. Take selfish. Am I selfish for making this recording? Because I define the body that's talking into this microphone as myself. Therefore, is everything that I'm doing selfish? If I go and steal something and hurt another human being, but I get a new stereo, is that selfish? And how selfish? How selfish is that? Like, on the continuum of selfishness, is it more selfish to endure the fear, the anxiety, the sadness of knowing that I'm in a dog-eat-dog world? How much sadness is there relative to this archetype, this tradition of being a family of apes or chimpanzees, being part of a troop? So where's the selfishness in this action? Is it as selfish as earning the money to create that stereo within the capitalist paradigm? Is that more selfish? To earn the money? Because then I'm strengthening myself. I'm teaching myself how to earn money. And, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So if I go out and earn the money and learn how to buy many stereos, is that more selfish or less selfish than stealing? Which is the stronger self? Now, is it better for me? See, what I'm getting at is if you look carefully at selflessness, like, oh, he's such a selfless person, he'd give you the last shirt off their back. Well, if it's a metaphor, it's one thing. But what about the person that actually does that? They're on their way to a business meeting. They give their last shirt away. Because we got to, follow these analogies through. You give your last shirt away. They arrive naked at the business meeting. They don't get the job. Why? Because they're outside the pale. Because our culture little box doesn't have room for naked people. Why? This, that, the other? Well, for whatever reason, we don't have room for you. You, the naked one, go out, go away. So you've transgressed the cultural box. So you then get fired. Then you can't buy any more shirts, so you can't give any away. So you could actually say it would be much more selfish to have not given the last shirt off your back, to instead have got the job, to have made more money and given several shirts a month away on an ongoing basis, supported by the money of your success, which was ruined by being too selfless. So what I'm saying is that's not selfless at all. If you look very closely at the boundary between selfless and selfless, what you find is that the strongest cohesion, that the greatest selfishness is to have a strong, supportive, and ethical community around you, because nothing is more fun, more safe, more belonging. It's rich. If you are surrounded by a group of strong, what do I mean by strong? Again, we're all in these cultural boxes, but someone who can take care of themselves, someone who loves themselves, someone who loves others, someone who knows their basic goodness, someone who understands their basic generosity, who knows the joy of giving from a place of abundance because they're strong. Abundance is a strong energy. It comes from a place of confidence in one's capacity to generate a positive future. And when we as human beings are confident in our future, we are strong. We are present. When we are confident in our future, and we are generous. When we absolutely know that there is never going to be another day in our life when we are alone and lonely, when we are desperate and helpless, when we are abandoned and betrayed, when we lack the ability to keep ourselves alive with dignity, when we know with absolute certainty that we have that, and we have pleasure and complex joys and projects with abundance, we are generous. Because as open and expansive human beings, it is no fun to be surrounded by people in fear, in terror, in guilt, in shame, in need and desperation. It's no fun. It's fun to see their joy, their gratitude, their strength, their confidence, their hope growing. It's fun. And we love fun. We are a healthy species. We love fun. And it's fun. When we have abundance, it's fun to give. It is not fun to give. Knowing that if this went wrong and that went wrong and this went wrong, which are all outside of our control, I've got 3 houses, but the mortgages are high. Look at what happened in 2009. I could lose this house. My leg isn't that good. I'm not certain about that. I could lose that. My wife's been drinking a lot. She seems to be hanging out. We may have to have a divorce. I could lose half that. I may not be able to make the mortgage payments if this is... And, of course, I'm dealing with the old stereotypes, the old walls, that are still so familiar and comfortable in their familiarity, in which men make more money than women and all of this stuff. But... And I may feel like a fool. And I may look back at this gift of this person and this person and this person, and I may feel like an idiot. And in this culture, everyone's going to tell me I was an idiot. You idiot! You idiot, you were kind. And so I'm not going to. Not because it wouldn't be fun, but because it wouldn't be fun to end up all alone in the uncertainty of our own future, and realize that no one is there for us in the way that we were there for them. And this is an interesting dynamic which is exacerbated by what I'd call high flux transiency. So in a healthy situation, if you had a millionaire living in a village over a 50-year period, who every time one of the villagers was sick and whatever, and they gave away the money to the sickness, and the villagers all stayed in the village, and everyone knew that the village's health and well-being was a blessing from this person. They all knew her name. They all knew how much money they'd received. They all knew this and that and the other, and the millionaire ran out of money, and she needed help. In most cultures, in most situations, the villagers, having formed that bond over time of loyalty, of love, would help. Maybe she helped 200 people during the time of her fortune, and then something happened, her accountant embezzled it, whatever, and it's gone. But she helped 200 people. There's a statistical probability in an ongoing long-term relationship where someone is trusted and known in that way, that maybe 50 people would be there to help her, look after her, help her move into one of their houses, this and that and the other, and just take beautiful care of her until her death or whatever. But in a high-flux transiency culture where this millionaire, has helped the same 200 people who are all strangers scattered around the world, who have just met her, she's just seen their time of need, and she's given and given and given and given, she may have absolutely nothing because she is not known as a giver by the people who are now around who are all new. And this is one of the things that we need to be aware of in our culture, is that very kind and generous people are giving and giving and giving and giving, and the people they're giving to are off to Australia, off to this town, off to that town, busy, over here, over here, over here. And it's a dissipation that's not coming back at the rate that it's going out, and it becomes unsustainable. And there's a real sadness around not being known, not being honored in the gift, in the care and the love. Because love, when it's given and it's honored, is beautiful. It's the most joyful experience in the world. And love, when it's given, and it's unseen, it's invisible, it's dishonored, it's disrespected, and it's used, is one of the most lonely, painful, miserable experiences that we have as human beings. And it's a way that the transitory nature of our current cultural, global culture, is destroying generosity. And virtual reality and Facebook and stuff may play a part in that, as is the gift to people that we know, a gift to people that we know over time and who can give back to us. So how do we bring this back into this focus, this question of ego? Because according to, say, the Book of Miracles, is it the Book of Miracles? Or anyway, I think it's the Book of Miracles, where it says there's love and there's fear, and fear is the enemy. Or there's the negative ego. If you work with the channel Lazarus, there's the negative ego, the ego that's out to get you, that's out to destroy you, and Or the common reference that's egotistical, so therefore not to be listened to. So I want to suggest a couple of different alternate perspectives. So, number one, there is nothing that comes through a person. That if you look at the ego as basically the concept of the conscious self, that there is nothing that comes through a person, positive, negative, or in mixed results, that is not that self. That there is no getting rid of the self unless you want to shoot the other person, and you, the self, your ego, will be the one shooting the other person's ego. You kill the body, you kill all the memories and whatever and stuff, and you can say, okay, their ego is dead. They are dead. So their ego is dead with them. So, of course, that is available if you want to go around shooting people to get rid of their ego. But it's obviously a little bit absurd. It'd be a little bit like taking a hammer and saying, this hammer can hurt people, and so let's throw away this hammer. But this hammer can also build things. And who we are as a self, the self that says I'm me and not you and you and you and not this and this and this, that is the self. Otherwise there's no word for it. We're just, because there are ways of looking at human beings and experiencing ourselves as part of an ecology where there's no difference between us and the earth, because we are part of the earth. We are the earth. We were born from the earth. We evolved from the earth. We relate with the earth. Every part of our body is of this earth. We are a part of the ecology of earth. But we don't tend to see it that way. It's like, no. That's the earth and this is me. I'm separate. And there's some interesting analogies with cancer. That cancer is a structure within the body that stops following the vital sense of self of someone and starts growing much faster, doing its own agenda. And so in that way, our current sense of self, this is kind of a little bit of a bow to the negative aspects of ego, are that we are a Cancer. We are a part of the earth who thinks that we are separate from the earth and who is busy doing our own thing on the earth that has nothing to do with the earth. And if we look at the world as a training ground, as a learning temple or possibility, we can see the humor in this, because the biggest global challenge today for many of us is cancer as a statistical basis. And what's causing the cancer? All of the dissociated, highly concentrated elements of a modern world that we have engineered out of sync with our ecological host. And so by behaving like a Cancer on our host, our hostess, the gift of an environment, of an ecosphere, by saying, we don't like your music, we want our music. We don't like this, we like our thing. We don't like your forest, we like our skyscrapers. We don't like this, we like this. In other words, we are the guest. We are the guest on this ecological hostess who has arrived, who has been given birth and emerged from, and then has rejected as not good enough for us the most of what's on the menu in the ecology. And we have created something very different, and we're doing it very, very, very efficiently and fast. And that's, of course, what Cancer does in us. It's like some cell or something emerges, and it says, well, we're not interested in Dane's body. We're not interested in what his plans are. We've got all these interesting resources. What if we mined this one? What if we blocked this one? What if we started pulling stuff out of the bloodstream like this and using it to create our program, which is much better and more interesting than Dane's program because it's much faster. We like fast here in Cancer World. And so we're going to create some fast, interesting structures, and they're going to replicate and replicate and replicate. And we're not part of Dane. We're us. We're this. And we're much more efficient than Dane because we're destroying his body faster than he's destroying us. We're winning. We're the. And so in this weird dance, the very things that have created our cancer, the carcinogens, are created out of a dissociated mind. Dissociated meaning it has no sense of belonging to our host. No sense of fiduciary obligation or honoring our host. We are using our host for our plan, which has nothing to do with what's good for the planetary ecosphere. And in doing so, by doing what we want, rather than what facilitates balance and well-being on a planetary level, what we want our hair to stick up like this. Well, what do we need? We need a new chemical, and we need another one for this, and we need another one for this, and we need another one for this, and this, and this, and this, and then we want to drive like this, and we don't want to eat here, we want to eat over here, and we do this, this, and that, and we want to have it like this, and so we'll just pave over all these plants and drive our car. So we are the self-referencing, highly dynamic and efficient organism within the ecological ecosphere. And our cancer takes a nice, line from that lesson and says, well, you're doing so well at that, let's give it a shot. and heads to town. So this is just it's part of the dark shadow of the self, the dissociated self. So spiritual traditions and all that, the ego is bad, this, that, do we kill it, do we suppress it, are we ashamed of it, do we try to transcend and all this and that and the other. And I want to suggest that this is a little bit absurd, that if we don't want to have a singular identity and awareness of self, we can easily die. Nothing wrong with death. We can die anytime we wish. Of course, that's beyond the pale. The culture can't stand, that idea within its sense of what selves are supposed to be up to. But we can let go of our life at any point of our choosing. And our bodies can return to the natural ecology of the earth. And I just saw an interesting TED Talk recently about the natural burial ritual and process that's coming into our culture again, where it's basically giving all the nutrients in our body back to the earth as a gift, as opposed to pumping our bodies full of chemicals and trying to preserve the effect of the self and deny the natural transformational process. To give our bodies back to the earth, it's exciting, a gift back, an honoring. And it's 1/10 the cost, it's fertilizing, we can all do it. It does not need to be a hardship in the way that burial is a hardship for many people and families who are not expecting that expense and the whole ordeal and all that, and who are programmed to feel that somehow shame that they're not doing this and that and the other. Because particularly in capitalistic economies, one of the biggest kind of gangsterisms out there is for one industry after another to pull the wool over us and convince us that if we are not spending vast amounts of money and vast amounts of natural resource to do things in the way that requires buying their product, that we are less than healthy people. That if we're not wearing this sunglasses, these shoes, these pants, buying this coffin, it's like, whoa, a simple wood coffin. Oh, they must be they must not be civilized human beings like us, because we, of course, have a full bronze mahogany shipped out. We've cut down a whole rainforest for our coffin, and we da 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 da. And so it's all this hoodwinking. And if they succeed, it's basically when the majority agrees to say, they must be a really important person because they cut down a rainforest for their coffin, and all those interesting brass ornaments and stuff like that. Ooh, an important person, let's move out of the way. Like, this is the whole game, to convince a populace that it needs to sell its soul to make all this money to buy all these things, so that other people will say, that must be a really important person, because that goes back to that core programming, the safety of belonging, the security, and in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of moving up towards making a difference, contribution, legacy, meaning, aesthetics, legacy is part of our human and spiritual drive. So here's basically the issue that I have with dissing the ego. So within most of the cosmologies that I've heard, whether it's a highly enlightened channel, or the archangels, or God, Goddess, all that is, or Jesus, or Buddha, here's kind of the message. There's all these all-powerful beings up there. There's all these all-powerful beings up there. And why aren't they using any of that power? Well, whatever. So there's usually some kind of a mythology that says that human beings have free will. So all this infinite power, but for some reason, none of that infinite power has stopped human suffering, disease, ignorance, etc. for millennia. None of it has stopped all the suffering that comes from tsunamis or earthquakes, etc. So most of the cosmologies would have us believe that there are literally hordes of all-powerful beings around us, around the planet, higher than us, this, that, and the other. And not one of them will stop a tsunami or take a child from being burned alive, or stop the herbalists from being burnt at the stakes by the Catholics, or stop Hitler. None of them are going to interfere or do anything. And in most cases, there's a sense that this is for human freedom, and two, that there's a moral imperative for the self, for the ego individual, to choose whether it's Jesus or Buddha, or not to steal, or to give generously to the community, or pay your taxes, to choose to give to the community. And that and that it's imperative. And that the whole problem, that all the problems that we have are the selfish, stupid, ignorant, dumb human ego, basically. And there's a couple of things that are, I think, suggestive within what's just said there. Is, first of all, I have not heard a cosmology talking about the helpless, stupid deity that needs human beings to rescue the deity. There may be some of that in the ideas, like if you don't believe in fairies, then the fairy will die, like in the Tinkerbell mythology. But in the religions, none of them in modern history make their all-powerful being less powerful than human beings, i.e. dependent on human beings. They're all making them, superhuman. Some of them are punitive and punishing, like the Old Testament God, or some of Allah's, antics and stuff. Others of them are more, beneficent, like the Buddha and stuff. But they're all powerful, advanced masters, whatever. And the question becomes, is it appropriate for the human ego self, for your sense of you and me, to worry at all about God, about this, that, the other, needing to be rescued? And in general, one approach would be to say, well, they're all powerful and all that, so they've got their retirement fund handled. God's got his retirement fund. God's got his angels, his harps, his virgins, and da 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 da. I don't think we have to worry about God. Now, then the next question, of course, comes in, well, do we need to, follow the Ten Commandments and do this and that and the other because we will be punished, a lake of fire and this and that and the other. And I also, if you look at the self, at just the integrity of reason within these different arguments, how do you end up with an advanced deity who is less considerate, less kind, less generous, less forgiving than your grandmother, assuming you've got a halfway decent grandmother? Because, whether it's the lake of fire, hell for eternity, whatever these different antics and mythologies are, you've got a pretty sick deity implied in those. I mean, I thought about it when I was 13 years old, and I realized that despite the hate, the rage, the fear, the terror, the trauma, the helplessness, and enormous amounts of physical suffering, it's just not that much fun to hurt another person seriously for very long. In a spurt of rage and helplessness, you may punch someone, you may, this and that and the other. But, it's just not fun to keep doing that and doing it and doing it and punishing and punishing and punishing, particularly when the pain is severe. We're talking lake of fire, hell for eternity. I mean, these are absolute peak agonies for a long time. And if I came to the conclusion that no one I knew, including myself, would punish someone eternally in that kind of agony, period. Now, there's lots of boastful antics about that, but it's just not very human to do that. It's human to do it to a point where we feel powerful. Like, one of the biggest damages and trauma is the feeling of complete helplessness and powerlessness. And one of the most important things about punching, about getting even or whatever with your abuser, is the restoration of power and the sense that it doesn't go on eternally, that it can come to an end. And so that's part of the ritual. It's like, I saw my abuser in prison or whatever. But even so, there's also usually a part of the human being that kind of, it's like, not all of me wants you to go to prison and all that. What I would have really liked is for you to be a good human being and transcend this and not have hurt me. And then I wouldn't have had to hurt you, and the world would just be a much nicer place. That's what I'd really like. But since you did do that, and since I feel still a bit scared and in trauma, and since this is the law, and since I don't want you to go hurt other people again lightly, I'll go along and prosecute you or whatever. And it's kind of like that. But the thing that I want to say is that there is no deity. There's no deity. Deity is above, beyond, more evolved. That is more cruel, sadistic, sociopathic than human beings. We mythologize our own sociopathic stuff and project it out there. But there is no rationality, particularly when it's clear that the more power one has, just do that. If you really have, if you've ever experienced true power and abundance, it brings out the best in you. You give, you share, and you're sad for people who don't have that, and you try and help. That's human nature. if we've ever experienced true power, I'm not talking about the ability to blow someone up. That's not real power. The ability to create love and be loved, the ability to pursue our dreams, the ability to have abundance that we can do that. We are kind. That's what's there. And so any deity that has more power and isn't, a deity doesn't have to pay rent. It's not like the deity has to punish human beings because if it doesn't, it won't get enough money to pay the rent. It's a joke. So what we can basically do is take away all the responsibility away from these deities. It's not the human ego's job to save a deity, worship a deity, stop itself from being punished by a deity. Because no deity that is a deity needs saving, needs rescuing, or is going to punish you. So what's left then for the ego to look at is then, why do we behave really, really unkindly and selfishly at times? And what can we do about that? And it's not even that. It's like we have these different programs. So we have this survival, fight, flight, freeze thing that's supposed to get us through the hour alive. But of course, if we've just taken a punch at our boss and lose our job because we went through trauma, we got through the hour, feeling that we're alive, and now we need a livelihood. So there's these evolutionary tensions in our brain growth and capacity over time. And so what we need to do is we need to lift out of the sociopathic brain, the reptilian brain, into our human brain. And at times we need to lift out of our human brain, the right and left hemisphere, through the pineal gland, which has DMT, which seems to be the physical organ that gives us the sense of self while going beyond self. Meaning, as I said, if we just go beyond all self, there's nothing there. There's no sense of self. We don't exist. But there's a sense that this is us. And this is me feeling like this larger sense is us and me. So it's the pineal gland, the gland within this body that seems to be functioning as an autonomous entity in the ecology, that gives us, we need that modulator, and it seems to be the pineal gland that allows that. And so we need to have transcendent experiences of transcending the reptilian stage of our evolution and becoming human, and transcending the human stage of our evolution, and having a sense that we are more, reawakening and remembering to member again, remember to put together again this truth that we are a part of this ecology. We are not separate. We are part of this ecology. And we need to experience it viscerally, to know it. And we do that through transcendent experiences in meditation, with psilocybin, with DMT. We do that whether it's spontaneously generated. And here's an interesting thing you may not know. If you have taken DMT at any point in your life, you could find yourself one night having a lucid dream, a dream in which you're awake, that you are awake. You know that you know. You're conscious that you're conscious. And in that dream in which you're conscious that you're conscious, you can choose to smoke or inject DMT. And as you do, you will go on a journey that is as real and visceral, thanks to the natural DMT that is present in our brain, as if you actually did take DMT. Where the color, and if you are having a lucid dream at the time, you've basically had a DMT experience again. That can be transcendent, and I'm saying this because while psychedelics are one of the most reliable ways to ensure a transcendent experience, simply by shutting down parts of the other brain and infusing in the chemical that is, as Rick Strassman called it, the spirit molecule. That's helping this brain chemistry realign in a way that this sense of separateness is broken down, and now we're a part of something bigger. See, this is the state in which cooperation, generosity, and love is most pregnant. And the question is, how do we get there culturally? And I'd like to suggest that it is the exact opposite of this ego bashing. I'd like to suggest that the reptilian brain has one job and one job only, and that is to keep the body alive. And to do that, it dissociates the emotions of the individual needing to react rapidly when under threat. In other words, the reptilian brain creates and induces a sociopathic state in which we are barbaric to ourselves and one another in the expediency of survival, so that we can then come out of that state and still have our body and go back to being human and spiritual beings. That's its job. And as long as there are human beings who are being shamed, jailed, punished, abused, violated, raped, lied to, evicted without sanctuary, with unable to find nourishing food, looked at as less than a human being because of some circumstance or series of circumstance in their life, there will be trauma. As long as there is trauma, the traumatic circuit of survival within the reptilian brain will be activated within all parts of the human being. It will be activated, and we will have created a human being in a sociopathic state. Now, if we are so stupid that we blame and punish the human being who has been induced by a sick environment into a sociopathic state, that we want to enter our own sociopathic state and imprison them for 10, 20 years, for whatever they did trying to survive within a sociopathic state. A sociopathic state that is biologically wired within the brain to protect individuals in an unsafe environment. We are perfectly welcome to grind our cultures and world into the ground, locking people up for $30,000 to $80,000 US dollars a year, taking them out of the workforce, hurting them. We are perfectly capable of sustaining the sociopathic state within the prison system and the prison guards and the people bringing these people to trial, because there is profound grief, sadness, remorse, and loneliness in putting someone in prison. It means that when someone goes beyond the pale, going back to that thing, when someone chooses to step outside the wall, there is always a reason. You take someone that's highly vindictive and incredibly hostile, and that's a person who has gone through enormous amounts of unacknowledged, unhonored pain in a culture that caused it but did not heal it. That is always what's going on there. But when that pain is outside the wall, beyond the pale, it becomes very difficult for the culture that created the wall and the blindness that the wall creates to see the pain that is created by partitioning the self off from the self. And anything that isn't the good traditional values that's outside the wall, that pain doesn't count within the wall. There can be tons and tons of gold in a dimension of the psyche that is dishonored, unseen, and unacknowledged within the pale, within the wall. And it doesn't matter whether there's 300 tons of gold in that dimension or 1 penny's worth of coal. It's not honored, it's not seen. But you and I, as human beings, separated from parts of ourselves, feel when we are not completely numb, when we are not completely anesthetized by the cultural dogma and programming, we feel the loss of that part of us that is outside the wall. And when we do, we may transgress the wall. We may climb over the wall, becoming in effect criminal, because most cultures patrol the borders of their box with machine guns in the same way they patrol the borders of their country with machine guns. They patrol both their cultural walls and their physical walls with machine guns, with a sociopathic state, with a sociopathic protocol, and with shame. And in Sam Keen's work, Faces of the Enemy, there is always a demonization, a dehumanization of the one who is outside the other. And yet, this is the most important part of who we are and of what is. It is the other. It is the part outside the wall. The wall of any culture is no more significant than the wall around a single rice paddy in a tapestry of millions, billions of different rice paddies in different countries and cultures throughout the universe. It's very, very tiny. Everything of relevance and importance is outside the pale. Scale and significance, it's outside the pale. And when we transgress our own borders, finding those parts of ourselves that have been truncated within the box. We are on a path of healing, of shamanism, of integration, and of visiting the other. It must be done with respect, with reverence for the many different values, the many different thought constructs, the many different emotions, the many different personas that are tolerated in different rice paddies. Each country, each culture has their little set of the social heroes and the social taboo. Now, the important thing with traveling, of course, is that they are different in every culture. You go to England and you'll find the entire country, aligned around how terrible this one face of humanity is. And you look at it, that face wasn't terrible in this other country over here. You realize it's quite arbitrary. Or if it's not arbitrary, it's relevant to the traditions and social references that have come before. It's not objective. And so the question then comes, if anyone who is in a life-threatening situation will be, to varying degrees, induced into a traumatic state through what I'm calling the reptilian brain, then if we want to have human beings who are focusing as one and together, we have to transcend the reptilian state, the sociopathic state. Well, you don't do that by shaming human beings in a sociopathic state, because shame is a trauma, which is one of the variables of where that state, that led to that state being induced in a given individual to begin with. You take off the shame. You welcome that persona home. You see the human being that has been trapped, witnessing the sociopathic behavior, but unable to intervene because the brain chemistry is saying, no, you, body, are in a sick, corrupt, dangerous, confusing, and traumatic environment. Every time you turn on the TV, trauma, corruption, lies, confusion. Every time you do business with people, you see it here and here. You talk with your family, it goes on here and here. You have been raped. You have been stolen from. You have been physically threatened, and you know your own country will knock the doors down to cart you off to prison for exploring your own consciousness with psychedelic drugs that have an LD50 that are off the charts. Like LSD, it's very, very hard to die from overdose. But many pharmaceuticals are incredibly toxic with massive side effects. And so, there's not science here. There's sociopathic paranoia. And when you know that, and that no one will take a stand for you in your own country, in your own planet. I don't even think there's a place on the planet today where it is legal to explore the scientific and therapeutic value within a scientific setting of LSD on the entire planet, because of the level of social paranoia. Alcohol kills way more people than psychedelics has ever had every year. It's not a concern, because alcoholism is within the social pale of most countries. It's depressing, it's a little rowdy, but you don't question core values. So it's sanctioned in. Coffee, not very good for your health, good for business. So business is sanctioned, so it's put in. Cigarettes, incredibly toxic, but they help alleviate stress in dysfunctional social environments. And they don't lead you to question the system. They usually suppress your anger at what's upsetting you in the system. So it's okay. It doesn't cause the cultural walls on our little rice paddies to tremble the way psilocybin or DMT or LSD does. Because even though they occur naturally in the body or have a high LD50, meaning very, very low toxicity relative to most pharmaceutical drugs, most pharmaceutical drugs don't invite you to challenge the cruel atrocities of a culture on its own citizenry, so that the blessed constituents within the culture can maintain their comfort zone. Though how comfortable it can be when you realize that you're welcome at the table only because you haven't explored your consciousness in certain ways, only because you've paid your taxes. Whether you believe in the way your money is being spent or not, you've paid those taxes only because you said things in a verbal and rational, articulate way without weeping. If you wept, the sounds that you feel when you see the cruelty around you, that you would not be welcome at the table. Because it is not a table where grief is welcome. This is a sociopathic table. It's a sociopathic culture. And a sociopathic culture breeds sociopaths. I want to tell you about an experience I had in Copenhagen, where the Danes have been going beyond the pale in American, taboos for some time. They're a socialist democracy. We all know how bad that is. And they have high taxes, and we all know how bad that is. And so I went to Copenhagen and interviewed 30 people at random. 30 people at random. Buses, parks, pubs, whatever. You want to know the result? Not a single person didn't like their government. Not a single person complained about the taxes. Not a single person was unhappy with their work. And not a single person was unhappy with their life. I mean, this is, for an American, this is mind-blowing. You can't interview 3 Americans and get one of them. I mean, it's just outrageous. Not only that, the thing that really struck me was there was no fear. These were not anxiously busy people. They were relaxed and sociable people. They were curious. They were well educated. Every single one of them had a college education, courtesy of their government. Every single one of them had a great free healthcare system. Every single one of them could get housing support if necessary. Every single one of them had unemployment, had free job retraining. If any of them didn't like their job, they could go they could stop working and immediately get high-level unemployment, no questions asked. 2, they could get retrained in the job they wanted to do. If there was a new field that they were getting excited about, they read some magazine articles about the high-tech sector or space or this, that, they can get retrained with full support from the Danish government to become an expert in the field they're most excited about. And then, when they get a job, their unemployment stops. And they're now in a job they love, which means they're highly productive. And this was, this leads to more billionaires per capita in Scandinavian countries than in the United States, where supposedly all of this brutality and sociopathic behavior and calling each other losers and all that, and no free health care and no free unemployment and no job retraining and no great, and it's not a great healthcare, and the government is not anything to be too proud of. So this great, this supposedly is all for a fair playing field for the rich to easily get rich. And yet more billionaires per capita in Scandinavia than in the United States. Everyone has much higher wages there. What I'm getting at is, if we do not want to deal with sociopaths, or that's even not kosher, if we do not want to deal with our mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters, with other human beings reduced from their spiritual potential down to a sociopathic state, through induced trauma, through a sociopathic culture that is more interested in shaming, imprisoning, lying to, and protecting itself than its citizens, we will need to create a healthy, loving environment for this most fragile of creatures, the human ego. The human ego that is alone despite its social pack background. The human ego that has this ability to think that isolates it from almost everything, because every single person thinks different thoughts. The human being that is incredibly vulnerable, that may destroy its own existence on the planet, that easily can, that's in a cultural ecosphere that is far more complex and threatening than any environmental ecology ever was, where every single person in the environment has a different cultural program about what's good, what's bad, what's attractive, what's not attractive, what's cool, what's a loser, and all that stuff. And everyone's running a different program. And the human ego is trying to exist in this gasping for breath, with a high chemical load from all the chemicals we've created, with a high social load from all this complexity, with a high information load from just so many new sources of information, and a deep dissociation from its ecological roots, its spiritual roots, its traditional roots, its body rhythms, as the day becomes night with power and all kinds of things, and there's no stable routine. This is a very, very fragile sense of consciousness that's easily threatened, easily feels isolated, shamed, alone. And it requires great love and great compassion and great engineering to see that these egos that we each have do not feel paranoid, terrified, alone, shamed, lost, insane and crazy in all this flux of chaos, but that feel cared about and safe. The human being that feels cared about and safe is not in their reptilian brain. They're in their human brain. And the human being that cares about other human beings naturally reaches to a state of love, of compassion. And the human being that reaches out with love and compassion wants to transcend, wants to move beyond, to have a remembrance, a memory, a re-togetherness of the whole it has always been a part of. And yet, in the trauma of evolution, in the trauma of coming from the trees, in the trauma of the ice ages, in the trauma of predatory hunting and all that, in that trauma has gotten reduced from its potential down to a sociopathic state so frequently. It has to be ready for that, for the shock, for the unknown trauma that is right around the corner, socially, financially, health-wise, in so many levels, that it never does reach out. And this is something we can only solve together. And it comes with a couple of things. Number one, if you don't want to shoot everyone, the ego is here to stay. Number two, if you do not want to engage with someone in a sociopathic state, we all must work together to create an environment that is so safe, not just from life-threatening physical things, but from shame, from blame, from criticism and loneliness and abuse, that we maintain our humanity, our sense of humor about challenges, and help one another. Because the fastest and most efficient way to induce a sociopathic state in any human being is to put them in a win-lose environment with no regard for who they are and demand sociopathic behavior in return in order to have good odds of survival. And that, in many situations, is the American business world, the capitalist system. It is the free market democracy in which there are big winners and losers with no regard for the loser. It's a kind of winner-takes-all system. And we've softened that in varying degrees, but not as well as the Danes in Denmark, who not only are keeping their citizens safe in so many ways, but have a higher quality of life by a large margin, in their air quality, their water quality, their architecture quality, their park quality, their road and traffic quality. It's just a higher quality of life than anything that I've seen in the United States. It's important that we're humble enough to learn, that we care enough about ourselves and other people to learn, to want to be in a country like that, and to care, to learn. The ego is not the enemy. It is a narrow-focused lens through which all human activity is mediated. It is a lens that is so tight and microscopic. It has incredible power and potency to bring joy, love, health, and kindness, or to torture and reduce a large segment of our population into a sociopathic, traumatized state that leads to violence, shaming, competitiveness, dishonesty, and further spreads the traumatic wave. There's no way to take an individual out of trauma in a traumatic environment. You have to heal the environment before you can heal the people in the environment. And that's my message.